everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS, and today I'm going to give you part 2 of my favourite depictions of death in film, TV and books. And last time we left off we were at number 8, which was The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water from the public information films of the early 1970s, which involved death looming over the mischief of children playing in quarry ponds, and if they fall into the river, he will basically go and claim them. That's essentially what was my number 8 on my favourite depictions of death. So let's get right into it. Let's go at number 7, and that is Terry Pratchett or Death from the Terry Pratchett Discworld series. And what I really like about this depiction of death, and it's the sort of thing that you don't really associate with death, he's very warm, he's very conversational, he's very philosophical, he's also very human in the sense that he can be very absent-minded, he can also be very funny, and he can also have these very strange quirks, like he likes to read a book, or he likes to eat pastries, or whatever. It's one of those incredible aspects of his character, and whenever a person meets death in the Discworld universe, he will always be very pleasant, he'll always be very polite, he'll always say something like, oh, would you like a hand up if you've fallen over, or something like that. And I really do like that he has almost this warmth and this friendliness to him. But he just also has these really wonderful elements of philosophy about his character, like in one of the books in which he's heavily featured, called Hogfather, in which he basically has to save the world of Discworld and save Hogswatch, which is basically the Discworld version of Christmas. He essentially says to his granddaughter, she says, so what you're saying is humans need fantasy to make life bearable, effectively. And he goes, no, human beings need fantasy in order to be human. And that's such a wonderful philosophy, that we all need fantasy, we all need make-believe in order to, feel human. And that's kind of almost reminiscent of a quote from Philip Pullman where he goes, we need stories. Without stories, we wouldn't be human beings at all. And that's effectively along the same wavelength. But I really like Terry Pratchett's style. I really like his novels. He's effectively a more child-friendly version of Monty Python, where a lot of the humour is very outlandish, very surreal and silly, but it's more geared towards a general audience. And I think that's something that I really like about his books. But he also has his own flavour of humour as well. So I'd highly recommend his books, particularly The Hogfather, in which he's featured, in which the character of Death is featured. But yeah, moving swiftly on, that's my number 7, Death from the Terry Pratchett Discworld series. And my number 6 is Sharkrath from American Horror Story. And this character is effectively, she's also known as the Angel of Death. And she's played by Frances Conroy, and she basically shows up whenever a black feather falls from the heavens, or whenever a really beautiful and very haunting piano score kicks in with the characters in Asylum. Whenever that's about to happen and a character's about to die, the Angel of Death or Sharkath shows up. And she is a very consoling, a very comforting presence, kind of like a very similar theme with a lot of the deaths on this list so far. She is very comforting, but she can also be intimidating, especially if you're afraid to meet death. She can seem very intimidating and very kind of, frightening in many ways. But she is also very calm, very soothing. And she does have a certain degree of, she does have a certain degree of comfort. There's almost like this motherly or parental warmth to her character as well. And I like the fact that when she's about to take a soul away to the afterlife, she kisses them and her wings span out and almost like fully formed. And I really do love that. I love that image of when she leans down to kiss them, that will happen to her every single time. I really love that because it really shows that she's effectively fulfilling her duty as an angel of death, is she's basically ferrying souls to the next world. And it's such a wonderful concept. It's just such a beautiful visual as well. And what I really want to say about American Horror Story is it's an anthology series where every series is a self-contained story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this was the second season, and it's a really good second season, and it definitely shows, because this was probably one of the most highest rated critically and from a viewership perspective of the American Horror Story seasons. But I do have a soft spot for the first season, Murder House. That's my favourite out of the two. That was the one that got the ball rolling, so I do have a soft spot for that one as well. But I really do love this depiction of death. It's such a very striking image, and apparently I've heard through the grapevine that this character shows up in other seasons of American Horror Story as well, which I really do like. It gives that it gives the whole entire American Horror Story universe a sort of self-contained vibe or a cinematic universe sort of feel to it. So that's my number 6. It's Sharkath from American Horror Story Asylum. And my number 5 is Death from the Book Thief. And The Book Thief is a novel by Markus Zusak, and it's set during the Second World War in Germany, and it follows a young girl called Lysel, and she's basically living in a open city with her aunt and uncle, and she pretty much is against the war. She's against the Nazis, and that's pretty much reflective of the war during the time in Germany. A lot of people were for the Nazis and said that, they're, just fulfilling this great, pledge that we're building to a much greater world. But then there's some people who say, no, they're fascists, they're Nazis, they're doing cruel things throughout the world, and they're basically just overwhelming fascists. And in the case of Lysel, she's heavily against it. She's heavily against the Nazis. She's heavily against what they're doing. And what the Nazis do in history is they were mostly well known for burning books, having these grand, book burnings, these grand fires where they would just throw books into the flames, and it's such a horrific sight. But what's very interesting is that Lysel begins to love books and begins to really cherish books, and she starts to steal books from being burned in the flames. She also goes to bookshops that have been bombed, and she gets books from there as well. She tries to get as many books as possible because she values what is within books, which is the idea of which is the knowledge, the wisdom, and the empathy that these books impart. And it gives you freedom of thought, which is what the Nazis didn't want people to have. And that's basically her sticking a middle finger up to the Nazis and saying, I'm literally going to fill myself up with knowledge and insight and empathy, and you're not going to do anything about it. And it's such a powerful story. I absolutely love it. But one of the things that I really like about The Book Thief, the book anyway, is the fact that the main narrator is Death. And Death is, again, a very light, casual observer of the events in the story, but he only meets the Book Thief 3 times, and both times he really does start to develop a little bit of a compassionate, much compassion with humanity through him observing Lysel and what she's going through and how she reacts to the war and death and all the conflict in Germany around the Second World War. And it's such a very powerful story in that regard. But what I really love about Death is how he has absolute compassion for humans. Like, there's this really wonderful line at the very end of the book where he goes, "I'm haunted by humans." And it's such a fantastic book. I would highly recommend the book in a heartbeat, because that pitch of it being told from the point of view of Death is worth the price of admission alone. The film's good too, but I think the film leaves out that very important quality that it is told from the point of view of Death. And people who haven't read the book but have seen the film will obviously get confused when the narrator comes in and says, "Oh, I'm here again," and it's like, well, who is this guy? Who is this narrator supposed to be? Like, "Oh, I'm here again," or "I'm ever watchful during this time," or something like that. Like, who is this meant to be referring to? But then, of course, if you've read the book, you know that it's Death. So I really do think the book is worth checking out. It's by Markus Zusak, and I absolutely think it's amazing, and I'd highly recommend it. So that's my number 5. And my number 4 is The Big Bad Wolf from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is a sequel to the 2010 film of the same name, and it follows on from Puss in Boots, and he basically is at this stage where he's quite reckless with his life, and one day when he's finished fighting a titan, he's known around his local town as being the great and fearless hero, but he effectively loses his 8th life, so he now has only 1 life left, and he starts to get depressed when death comes for him, and he finds his redemption through tracking down a wishing star to create to grant one final wish so that he can get all his 9 lives back, and he can become a great and fearless hero. But death is on his tail, and death comes in the form of a big bad wolf who's grey of fur and has red eyes, great big piercing red eyes. And he has a whistle which is quite haunting. And if you hear the whistle in the film, it is really haunting, but this character is really terrifying. But he's also very kind of, he has a good sense of humour as well. Like I love the when he first meets Puss, he goes, "There's the famous hat, the feather, and of course the boots." And he smiles and he just says, "My compliments to your cobbler," and things like that. Like I really do love the fact that he does want to, hold up a conversation. It's like when you meet someone who's very famous, but you also kind of aren't a big fan of theirs, but you're fascinated by them. It's kind of like that, the way he talks to Puss in Boots in the opening scenes in which we see him. And then when he finds out, when Puss cottons together that he's a bounty hunter at first, he thinks, "Oh, well, I can take you. Like I've fought many creatures and many men who are bigger than me, and I've won, so you're no challenge." But then he realizes that there's something quite strong about death, and there's even a moment where he tries to fight him and he whispers in his ear and he says, "You're not living up to the legend, are you?" And it's such a great character. And what I really love about this character, before I move on, is how terrifying he is. Like, that whistle really does give you that sense of absolute anxiety that Puss does whenever he hears it as well. Like, you really do feel like you're in Puss's shoes when he's having the panic attack scene. There's so many great moments in this film, but whenever you hear that whistle, you really do feel on edge for Puss, and you really do feel like he is an intimidating presence. But there's this one shot which really is quite scary, where when Puss pieces together that the creature that's actually following him is in fact Death himself, he goes, "You're no bounty hunter," and he goes, "You're Death." And there's a shot where when he says the word death, the wolf has this smile on his face, and it's like he's being shown through a reflection in the glass of this place that Puss finds himself in, sort of like this fortress of solitude looking place. And he smiles, and you see his eyes in the reflection, and you see his grin, and it's really terrifying. Like, if you saw that coming towards you as your final moments come to a head, it's really quite terrifying. It's really quite scary. So I really do think that's wonderful about this character. So the big bad wolf from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is my number 4, and my number 3, moving swiftly on, is well, let's just say he has a blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. Yep, it is Michael Myers himself, the Shape. And the reason why I've chosen him as my favourite depiction of death is because, well, for one thing, Dr. Sam Loomis calls him Death in one instance in the first Halloween film. But he just is. Like, there's so many hints to make him go that he is literally the personification of death. He wears a white mask with black hair. He wears black overalls, kind of like his version of a cloak. He has a knife, like a butcher's knife or a kitchen knife, sort of like his Reaper scythe. And he is literally death. And there's even a further pinpointing of that with, in one scene, the song "Don't Fear the Reaper" by Blue Oyster Cult is playing in the background. And he just is basically the personification of death, in the sense that he harasses these teenagers, he basically tracks them down, and he murders them in quite brutal ways. And I really do like the fact that with Michael Myers, you don't really know what really makes him tick. You don't know why he's committing these murders. He just is, and he's doing it because, for one reason or another, he just gets some sort of thrill out of it. It's not really made quite clear what it is. He basically, as so many people described him, as like a force of nature. He's known to, in the credits, as the Shape. He's also referred to as this great, overwhelmingly otherworldly being by a lot of people. That the more you try to kill him, the more he kills, the more he becomes something else. He becomes something further than human, and that's effectively quite a terrifying concept. But in many cases, Michael Myers is just basically one thing. You can't reason with him. You can't, beg for your life because he won't have sympathy for you. He'll basically kill you right off the bat. And he doesn't care who you are, whether you're a child, whether you are a man or a woman, a fully grown man or a woman or a child or even an animal. He will literally try to kill you because he's like a shark. He's like the shark of the land where he will go after anybody and he doesn't care who you are. He will come after you and he is relentless. And he is just, to quote the man himself, he is just purely and simply evil. And he is absolutely wonderful. That's my number 2, Michael Myers from the Halloween franchise. And my second depiction of death is from the Final Destination series. I love death in the Final Destination series. So basically the entire series goes like this. A teenager in a group of teenagers, usually high school students or college students or whatever, has a vision, and it's basically that they go on this shared experience like a roller coaster or an aeroplane or a road a traffic collision or a road work sort of like a road trip or whatever, or a bus journey, and they have a vision and everyone's going to die on that particular place, that particular shared experience, roller coaster, airplane, or whatever it happens to be. And they create a stir which allows all the people to remove themselves from that big event, thus avoiding death. And death, feeling cheated, goes after them and kills them one by one in very creative and very outlandish ways. And what I really love about this concept is it's not, with a lot of horror films either are in the category of ghost story, very bloody and very brutal vampire story, or story about vampires discussing humanity or whatever, slasher film, or anything else. And usually the topic of death is usually very much trivialized in those films, where the thing to fear is the guy in the hockey mask or the ghost in the corner of the room or something along those lines, something supernatural or something that you can't necessarily reason with or control, or someone in a hockey mask or someone with a sharp blade wanting to kill you. In the case of Final Destination, it's just the figure of death itself that's after you. And that's the most terrifying thing about this whole thing. And I really just think it's fantastic. It is a wonderful series. I never get tired of watching them. And I really do think even the bad installments of Final Destination are interesting ones. And I really do enjoy the deaths. I enjoy the characters sometimes. But I really do think the deaths are really brutal, and they're not for the faint of heart. Like, if you think that these deaths are going to be slow and rather, calm and relaxing, they're not. Sometimes they're very brutal, and they can give certain public information films of Britain a run for their money in how brutal they can be. Like, honestly, Apaches and The Finishing Line have nothing on these deaths. Like, honestly, they really do feel brutal. Although, I suppose you could say with those films, they are more brutal because they're happening to children. But I feel like in Final Destination, they literally make you go, Jesus, that's really brutal. But I really do love these films, and I just think the entire Final Destination franchise deserves a place on this list in regards to favourite depictions of death. And my number 1 favourite depiction of death is from, drumroll please, Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. And first of all, a bit of context. The Castlevania series is basically a series of video games in which you play a vampire hunter going into a castle and effectively destroying all these supernatural creatures along your way. Sometimes they're either vampires, sometimes they're skeletons, sometimes they're winged creatures like gargoyles. But the main objective is you always go to the same place, which is you're fighting Dracula. Dracula's the big bad of the entire series. But in this story, it's a sequel to another series called the Lords of Shadow series, in which you follow a vampire hunter called Gabriel Belmont, who is being given the sacred destiny of becoming God's chosen one, which is he basically is the ultimate vampire slayer. He's the ultimate hunter, he's the ultimate destroyer of evil, and he's the ultimate man of faith. And he has a sacred destiny where if he is allowed to destroy the Lords of Shadow, he will basically rid the world of evil and there'll be peace and harmony. But when he does eventually destroy the Lords of Shadow, he has there's a little twist in his little contract where he has to literally become a Lord of Shadow, and that's how he becomes Dracula. And in this game, you basically play as Dracula, and you have to go around killing people, draining them of their blood, and fighting all sorts of badass bosses, whilst also helping Death to reclaim the established order, not have evil win, but also, restore balance, because they have to basically stop the devil himself from returning to the world and claiming power. So Dracula's the only one who can stop him, but they also have to, do this, and in exchange, Death will give him the ultimate peace that Dracula has always wanted, which is eternal rest. And Death is played by a guy called Zorbeck in this version, and he basically is a philanthropist. He's a very charismatic businessman, and he's voiced by Jean-Luc Picard himself and Professor Xavier himself, Patrick Stewart. Do I need to say any more? Like, the idea of him basically voicing Death was literally the cherry on top of the cake for me when I found out that this game existed and I actually played it. And I absolutely just loved it. And I love the design of this character. Honestly, look up on Google Images, Death from Dracula Lords of Shadow 2. He looks fabulous. And what I really love even more is he's also a boss in the game. And I absolutely just really love this character. I love the fact that Patrick Stewart voices him. I love the fact that they also hint at the fact that he is in fact Death through various different means. One of which is that I picked up on in my playthrough was that a lot of the dark supernatural creatures, like the devils and the demons, you can tell that they're not really human because they love a good cigarette. Like, they really do love, smoking the old, cancer stick right in front of people and right in front of Dracula as well. Like, they know they're probably going to have their hands full of Dracula, but they're going to have a good smoke before they probably meet their end at the hands of Dracula. But I really do love that they probably gave a little bit of a reference to that. And they also kind of feel like a little bit of a nod to the X-Files is the Umbrella Man, where he basically would always have a cigarette in hand whenever he's encountering one of the main characters. And that's also kind of an interesting theme with this list, because the Final Destination, which was my number one, was originally intended to be an X-Files episode, but because the creators loved the idea so much, and because New Line loved the idea so much, they decided, let's make it into its own franchise. And that's my list for the top 10 favourite depictions of death in film, TV and books. I hope you're all doing very well, and if you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. And I hope you're all doing very well. This has been Josh with Whimsical and Industry Musings, or WHIMS, and I hope you're all doing very well. Take care, bye-bye for now.